All right, today I thought I would shake it up a little bit. We usually talk about politics, corruption, crime, what's going on with international war. Today we're going to really focus in on crime. I have best-selling author Billy Jensen with me, and we're going to go through some big crimes that he has helped solve. Billy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so you've been a writer, an investigative journalist, a best-selling author, a podcaster. What I want to know, before you wrote Killers Amidst Killers, how did you go from being a writer to actually being significantly important when it comes to solving disappearances,
Mhm.
murders, and cold cases?
Well, I had started writing, and to get my start, I was writing a lot about hockey fights and sports and things like that. And then I was always driven towards crime, and I was stringing for the New York Times. Did one story for the Post. It just felt very exploitative, in the sense where I wanted to push the story forward. I wanted to try and help solve these things, and so I couldn't really be a writer. You can't tell your editor, no, I don't want to do that story, it's already solved. So I went and I became an editor, but I would always write on the side. I would always write about unsolved murders, and I wanted to solve them. And you'd write stories, and they would be really well reported, and I'd like to say they were well written, and they would win awards, but they would have no endings. And that was always the cross that I had to bear for close to 15 years. Then I saw, as social media was getting going, and I started seeing ways that things could be solved via social media. I wrote the story about how these animal activists were able to track down this guy that was killing kittens online, and then he eventually killed a person. That was Luca Magnotta. That turned into this show, Don't Fuck with Cats, which was on Netflix. And saw the power of the internet, the power to do these things. And then I saw this guy get attacked on a street in Chicago, and this video was pretty clear, and the picture of the guy was pretty clear. And it was about 3 a.m. in River North, which is a popular part of Chicago. A lot of bars there, a lot of tourists. And this guy gets punched, and he is knocked out in the crosswalk. The guy yells at everybody to get away from him, the guy that punched him, and then a cab runs over him and kills him. And I'm watching this video, and then I'm watching the family talk about the video, and then they say the video's like 4 months old. And I was like, how do they not catch this guy? And then something went off in my head, and I said, I think I could try to catch this guy. So I started using social media, and I was really doing it from I was a little naive at the time, but I also knew how to get people's attention just from being a writer and having written headlines and worked on being an editor and having worked on covers for places like the Village Voice and those kind of things. And I said, well, I'm going to do it in the voice of the puncher. So I had a still picture of him from from up above from the video cameras, and you're saying, like, do you know who I am? Do you know that kind of thing. This eventually, I put out I set up a Facebook page and a Twitter page just specifically for that case, River North Puncher, and it got retweeted by one guy who I had done a story on. He was called Fan since 09. Then he knew Barstool Big Cat from the Barstool Sports team. He retweeted it because he's in Chicago. And then in the middle of the night, I got a reply that said, I hope this helps. And it was a straight on photo of the puncher. Definitely looked like the puncher. And I said, at first I thought this guy had done this in a computer, like he had computer modeled it somehow. He saw the picture from above, but it was in color, and I was just like, how did you do this? And then he wouldn't answer me back, so I kept on DMing him, like, please, I just need. And he said a friend of his took a video, and here's the video, and the video shocked me because it started with a picture of the victim, Marcus Gaines, in the street, the last photo of him ever taken. It was a video, and then it pans up to the puncher. I said, oh my God, I've got a picture of this guy straightforward now. So I took that picture. I started looking at a bunch of mugshots because luckily Cook County, which I don't agree with this, but Cook County puts their mugshots online. The guy had a very distinctive widow's peak. And I went through and I searched all the people. I found a bunch of guys that had been arrested around that area. Found 3 guys with that widow's peak. One guy I thought was too tall, one guy was too old, and another guy too short. And I actually had said to a production company, this could be a TV show. So we actually went and shot it, and they had me walk around Chicago with the picture, trying to find out who the guy's name is. And I knew that the guy's name was, there was one of the guys' names was Marcus Moore. I walked around to in that neighborhood. I walked around to, I think it was a guy parking cars, and he said, "No, I don't know him." Doorman said, "I don't know him." And then I walked up to a man who looked like he was unhoused, and I said, "Have you seen this guy?" And he said, "Yeah." We call him Big Dummy. His real name is Marcus. And sure enough, I had got the guy. Then I had to tell the police, and then the police did nothing. And then I was constantly telling the police. I had his Facebook page. The guy's updating his Facebook page, and he's saying where he is, but he's lying, because I know he's lying. He has a picture of himself. He says he's in New York, Holbrook, New York, but he says he's in a relationship with a girl in Minnesota, and I know his brother lives in Minnesota. I'm like, dude, he's in Minneapolis. So finally, after begging and begging, they finally pick him up. I solved my first one, and then I was like, I'm going to solve all of these. Yeah. And that turns out to be, as hard as it was actually the easiest one, and I've worked on about 50 cases so far. I've solved by myself probably 4 or 5 more. I've pushed forward and helped solve like 5 or 6. And, they take money. I buy geo-targeted advertising in different areas, and it works. And I wrote the first book, which is called Chase Darkness with Me. I wrote the first book just to tell people how to do it. And a lot of people have taken the ball and run with it and said, hey, we can do this. It was easier to do when Facebook was really humming and more young people were on Facebook, but it still works, and you use Twitter, and I've used Instagram, and I've haven't used TikTok yet, but their ad scheme is a little different. So eventually I will use that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's incredible. I'm sure the family who lost their family member to that cab, they wanted answers. They wanted justice. Nobody likes to have a story end without justice. But I visibly jumped when I was thinking, oh, the guy that punched jumps in a cab and drives away. And when you said he ran him over, I was like, oh my gosh.
Now, you can see the video online, and it's shocking, and it really is. And yeah, I worked with the family, and Drexina, who is his aunt, but really more like his sister. And I still keep in touch with her to this day. Yeah.
Okay. Many years ago, when Audible first started putting out Audible originals, my wife listened to one about the Golden State Killer. And at the time, I was trying to get a business up and running, and we like to listen to books together. Anyway, at nighttime, she would tell me, oh my gosh, they did this and this, and they were able to use DNA, but it was the brother's DNA, and like just telling me all these wild stories. And then, they end up catching this guy. And you played a role in that. So if you could, how did you end up helping finish off the Golden State Killer? Can you tell my audience about him, how he operated, some of the unique telltale signs that it was him, how he was tracked down and ultimately captured?
Yeah, so I was friends with a woman named Michelle McNamara, and she was a true crime writer. She had a blog called True Crime Diary, and I had been in LA, I think it was 2011, 2012, and I got an offer to do this like video podcast, and I wanted a co-host. So I did a search, I found her, we met, we started doing shows, and then she got the book deal. She couldn't do it anymore, but we remained friends, and she was constantly working on this book about the Golden State Killer. And this is a guy who was breaking into houses and raping women, often with the husband right next to the woman. He would then he would tie up the men, have them lay on their stomachs, and put dishes on their backs, and then bring the woman into the other room sometimes and say, if I hear these dishes move, I'm going to kill her, and then kill you. And then he did graduate towards to murder and started murdering these people. And nobody had caught him, and they had his DNA, and but it was not in any database that they had found. And Michelle was writing this book, and she was a fantastic writer. She comes from a creative writing background. In 2016, in the spring, she passed away suddenly. And as feeling kind of helpless, the one great thing about being a journalist is there's always something to do. On 9/11, there was something to do. There's always something, because there's always a story to tell. So when that happened, I wrote a obit for her, and then actually her assistant contacted me and said, can you write more about her? And I said, well, this book's got to come out. That's my biggest thing. And she said, and so then we started working, and I worked with her husband and her researcher. We were able to get the book out. The book came out, I think maybe 2 months before he was caught. And he was caught with using familial DNA, catching, and that's how a lot of these guys are being caught now. And he's yet to say a word. And he pled guilty, and he's away for forever. But that's how, that's been, so that and the Long Island serial killer, another case that I've worked on more extensively, is the two big kind of serial killer cases that have been solved over the last 5 years.
Yeah. So the guy, just so that my audience understands, wasn't he like a retired cop?
He was a cop, yeah.
And this is how he knew how to avoid leaving evidence behind, and how to cover his tracks. And
the crazy thing is that he only ever attacked first floor houses, because he was kind of a peeping Tom first. And then, he would hide behind the back branches and stuff. And then when I went and I stood in front of his house for the first time, the one thing I noticed was there's no bushes or anything. Like, he knew to protect his family by not having bushes around, And yes, he was, when we were digging up stuff the night we found out that this was the guy, before they announced it in the press conference, and we're doing LexisNexis searches, and we find this article of him as a police officer getting arrested for stealing I believe it was a hammer and dog repellent. And then it was like, this has got to be the guy. I mean, who else was doing this? Dog repellent. I mean, come on. And the fact he didn't fight it too. What cop gets fired and doesn't fight it? You always have the union in there and everything. And I was just like, this is it. So, people wondered why did he stop? Because he stopped in the mid 80s. People thought he might have been dead. He might have been in jail, but sometimes these guys just stop. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, just stopped, So I think this guy stopped because he stopped right around the time that people were using DNA to solve murders. And his biggest thing was always getting away. He was operating in his old hometown of his youth, and he was kind of a street kid, a rough kid, and he knew all the back ways and alleyways and canals and all of that stuff, and that's how he knew it. And when he realized he might start getting caught because somebody had seen him, that's when he started killing people. And then after that, he was able to let it go, and then he was just sticking around for a long time, and then was just a kind of a curmudgeon-y old man.
Oh, well. Now, remind me, because it's been a couple of years, but he never did one of these like 23andMe or Ancestry DNA tests, but his brother had.
I believe something along those lines. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, is that as these started getting, and there was a lot of civil liberties ideas that are around this, and it is terrifying. It is, if the insurance companies got a hold of this information, what would happen with your DNA, that kind of thing. But no, he hadn't done it. A family member had done it. I think I don't know if it was a brother or not. It was a long ways around there. And then you just kind of link them together. And then eventually, once you have that match, then you got to follow him around and see if he discards anything. And they followed him to a craft store, and they kind of got something off of the handle, but then they got tissues outside of his house. Long Island serial killer they got with pizza crust. You see pizza crust a lot. Pizza crust hangs on to a lot of DNA. So yeah, you've got these ways that it's able to go, and what you're seeing with these old cases of being solved with familial DNA. 23andMe and Ancestry.com, they don't open up their database. If they did, we'd solve a bunch right now. But what you can do is you take the one extra step. I've done it, and you take the raw data of your DNA, and then you put it into a different system. And then from that system, the police could track it or whatever. And that's one of the things that you could do to help solve a murder. Now, the caveat with that is that who does their DNA stuff? It's mostly white people. And, you're seeing a lot of white perpetrators, and there certainly are a lot of white serial killers out there, because there is, some white woman in Nebraska who wants to find out who her great grandfather was, paid the $100 for 23andMe, and then her entire family tree is in there and that kind of thing. So you don't see it with the other races. And so whenever anybody asks me that question, it's just like, it is loaded. The deck is stacked to a certain extent because of that, and just because you're only as good as your data set is. And we've got to, and it's a question of whether people want to do this or not, and then take that extra step of putting into something called GEDmatch and having them be able to solve things.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, and then what was the other big story that you were able to put the pieces together on? You mentioned a second one.
Well, you know what, Long Island serial killer, we were kind of investigating the investigation, and it turns out I kicked myself actually, because the police could have solved Long Island serial killer. They had it right there. This guy, the last of the canonical four, Gilgo four victims, who were found on a beach below Long Island, on a parkway called Ocean Parkway. She would do a thing where she would set up a date with a guy, and then as a sex worker, he would come in, and then her boyfriend would come in and say, "What are you doing here?" And then they would take his money. They would roll him. Now, that had happened right before she had gone missing. And they had the description of his truck. He drove a Chevy Avalanche, which you don't see a lot of Chevy Avalanches on Long Island. And he was big. He was like 6'5", really heavy. He was like an ogre type. It wouldn't have been that hard to find this guy and track him down. And they didn't. And I don't know necessarily if he kept on killing, but this was a mystery for 14 years. And finally, a new administration took over after 3 other administrations. They went back and looked at all the information, went back to that clue and said, maybe there's something there, looked at the truck, and then was able to put the things together. So, it's just, you see things like that. We had uncovered a lot of police corruption that was happening during the time period. But as far as like solving that one, that was all the police going back and looking at that old stuff. But I kicked myself that I didn't dig into that more, but what can you do?
Yeah. Well, I worked with the head of the Miami FBI field office to get a guy thrown in jail for 25 years. Out of 10,000 people, I had one piece of evidence that they needed in order to get him. It's always left me like a little bit looking over my shoulder, because I don't know if my name was shared or not. But do you have anything like that where you feel like, oh man, am I going to get any retribution from any of these, or are you just more driven by making sure that these psychos are off the streets?
I've gotten threats and things. Never really. I had an armed guard at my first book tour, but I never really, especially like in the places like Chicago where that happened. In LA, there was a guy that had shot a guy in a Jack in the Box, and they were going to give him the death penalty. And I'm not a death penalty guy, so that kind of shook me. It was like, I don't want to be potentially responsible, even though this guy killed a guy, and I'd become friendly with his friends and that kind of thing, and was able to solve that one. And But no, it's never really, a cop once told me once, don't be afraid of the bullet with your name on it, be afraid of the thousand bullets without your name on it. And I think that's how you got to kind of live your life.
Yeah, oh, interesting. Okay, so you have this book out, Killers Amidst Killers. Tell us what the book's about, what we're going to learn by reading it.
So in 2000, I believe it was 2018, I went to I found out that these two women who were sex workers, they were best friends and they lived together, had both gone missing, and then their bodies were found murdered. They had gone missing in Columbus, Ohio, and they had gone murdered. They had been found in fields outside of Columbus. So it was definitely somebody with a car. And I went to the house that they lived in. They lived in a house with a bunch of other people. And I found their third best friend. And I'm talking to her and I'm asking her, does this give you any pause for getting into a car? And, with a John. And she said, yeah, but I have to because I'm a drug addict. And that really hit me as thinking that I'm talking to this next victim. I'm talking to this woman who has this addiction inside her that's not her fault, that she has to go and do this, and puts her in danger. So I started looking at missing women and murdered women in Columbus, and then it kind of stretched out towards all of Southern Ohio and then really all of the country, and how the opioid epidemic has really created a system where these women were falling through the cracks. And I decided to, turn it into a book. And there's interviews with serial killers in there, and there's interviews with women on the street, and there's just a lot of stuff that that you don't normally get in the typical books. And the Columbus Police Department, this was the police department that actually, the Vice Squad, which was very dirty Vice Squad, they were the ones that arrested Stormy Daniels. I don't know if you remember that, when Stormy Daniels was, yeah. And the Vice Squad actually got disbanded. They had one cop in the Vice Squad that was taking these women and raping them, saying, I'll put you in jail or you have to have sex with me, which is considered rape. And one woman didn't know he was a cop, and she fought back, and then he shot her and killed her. And there was just so much ugliness going on in Columbus that it was a story that needed to be told. So put that, that book came out in December, and you can get it on, I do it on Audible, I read it. And then I also, obviously it's in print.
Yeah. As I watched I need to go back and watch that Don't Mess with Cats on Netflix, but my wife and I watched the Jeffrey Dahmer. I don't even know if we finished it. It just kept giving me the creeps every time I watched it. But I noticed he specifically targeted Black gay men in poor neighborhoods because he figured that nobody would go looking for them, right? And so these deaths in Ohio that you're talking about, I saw in your book like a list and a map, but it was just basically women sex workers that nobody would ask questions about or go looking for, and those kind of became the pattern of who was targeted.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily that this was somebody that wanted to go out and kill. These are, I come up with this, and halfway through the book, it's like these guys are jerk offs. These are not. We're not out looking for somebody that is a criminal mastermind or very clever, like a Bundy was. I mean, give Bundy credit. I mean, Bundy was kind of clever in certain things that he did. Some of the other serial killers are as well. These are guys that are just killing, 2 or 3 women. We're not looking at somebody that killed 21, to 2 or 3 women, and have gotten away with it. And that's even scarier than having one boogeyman out there, is having 15 or 20 out there in one town. And that's what that's what you're seeing out there in all of our towns. And I wrote this even before fentanyl. And now you've got fentanyl. I mean, obviously fentanyl was there, but it wasn't as big as it is now. Our fentanyl rates and what they call the deaths of despair, which are suicide, drinking, and drugs, are at an all-time high. And with fentanyl now, you've got a lot of people that aren't necessarily even dying of an overdose; they're dying of a poisoning. They're dying of they thought they were taking a Vicodin, but it turns out it had fentanyl in it. So
yeah, oh gosh. Well, I appreciate you coming on. I'm going to put a link down below to
Thank you.
Killers Amidst Killers. Billy Jensen, if people want to follow you or stay in the loop, where could they do that online?
You could just find me on Billy Jensen on Instagram. That's really where I'm, and that kind of thing. I do have one question for you, Stephen.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Why the biker scout bust?
The Biker Scout bust.
Yes.
Oh, right here.
Turn to your right. Yes.
Okay. So I have a bunch of custom made toys.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I've got a Terminator, a Mandalorian, an Iron Man, and then I've got this Terminator, and his eye, it's built into the 3D printed.
Mm-hmm.
Eyes light up red.
Uh-huh.
I just, during COVID, I wanted to have a different background.
Okay.
And so I would swap my background every day. Well, then it became too complicated to switch it every day. So behind this desk is actually a bunch of other toys.
Okay.
That are all custom made. I've got this baby Groot, and
Baby
like
Groot. Okay.
yeah, it looks like it's got the algae and the mold growing in.
Uh-huh.
So it was actually the guy who did my kitchen countertops. He was like, "You like Star Wars?" And I was like, "Yeah." He was like, "I'll build you these toys. They're not cheap, but I'll build them for you." And so that's the story
Wow.
how I started collecting those.
On my first anniversary of getting sober, I got sober June 26th of 2022. In 2023 over the summer, I went to where they shot the speeder bike scenes, which was kind of close to where I did rehab. And it's so cool. You can still go through there and you can follow the path that the camera went through for the speeder bike scenes. I like to go. I've been to, Yuma for some of the Jabba the Hutt scenes, for the barge. I would love to go to, you can't really go there right now just because there's a lot of strife and war, but Tunisia obviously is the big place, and that's where Tatooine is. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I saw the speeder bike scene. I was like, all right, that's cool.
Yeah, this one's actually kind of cool because it comes with a bust, but then
Right.
this helmet opens.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, so it's on a hinge, and it's got padding and all of that in there.
Very cool.
So yeah, they're kind of fun. My kids like to mess around with them. So yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up, but then I wanted to ask you a couple of questions offline, but I'll make sure to put a link to that down below, and also a link to your Instagram.